In order to make up my mind about the Fujifilm XH2S and whether it's worth purchasing or not, I ended up doing 3 shoots, some not planned. And I'll tell you now, my impressions, even after all that, is kind of a mix of good and bad. So without further ado, here's part 1.
Okay. Now you get when you do it, like over here, you go. Not too close.
You know, to really test out its hybrid abilities, I thought, okay, I love Fuji colors. Let's go do a photo shoot with this camera, this beautiful car, this beautiful setting. But what if we also documented the whole journey on video with the same camera, with the same lenses, right? It's not like you're saying, oh, okay, well, you can do both. But no, you can do both really well. Like the photos look amazing, but then also the footage is stunning. First and foremost, the quality of the camera, right? Arguably what matters most here is that image coming off the sensor in the codecs that they're providing you, F-Log2 in particular, which is all I used. Does it hold up compared to like what I'm using now, which is an FX3? And I would argue, given my color workflow and how I do it, I kind of treat it the same way I do my FX3 footage with obviously some tweaks. I prefer the image that comes out of the Fuji. It feels like there's a little more dynamic range. It feels like, there is definitely more information in the shadows. There's less chroma noise. And in general, the image does look a little more rich and thick and dense. There's a little more nuance to it, even though I'm shooting 10-bit 422 on both in the H.265 codec. So it's not like I'm shooting ProRes on the Fuji and then shooting, you know, some weird compressed thing on the Sony. I'm shooting the same type of codec on both, and I am preferring the image coming off the Fuji.
I mean record.
But it's not all great. You know, the XH2S has IBIS, internal body image stabilization, which is great, but then it also has that weird IBIS wobble that we saw with the Canon R5. You know, YouTube stuff, you could probably get away with it, it's fine. Whereas client work, I think that would be, I could see a client being like, why is the image shifting like that for no reason? It is a little distracting. I don't know if a firmware upgrade could fix that, but it's definitely there, and you're gonna see it in your footage. There's also what appears to be a bug. I've heard other people talk about this as well. So if you have a zoom lens on the camera and you zoom in and out, you'll notice that the exposure changes. And we're not changing any, you know, fixed aperture, fixed everything. But when you're zooming, all of a sudden the image sort of gets brighter on your monitor when you're viewing it, and then it kind of goes back to the normal exposure. And I thought, okay, maybe it's just like a weird screen thing, but the footage has the weird exposure change in post, like in your actual footage, it changes exposure. So it's doing some sort of compensation and then freaking out when in the process of zooming. So I'm assuming there's gonna be a firmware upgrade to fix that. But one thing I noticed is that there's also seems to be some sort of like software distortion correction stuff going on, like And so when you're zooming, you'll see the distortion correction kind of kick in and out. So you'll see the image sort of warp. And it's not IBIS, it's like an internal software thing that's like changing the image, and it kind of snaps back into what it thinks is kind of distortion corrected image. You'd see it more in like big rack zoom. Maybe it's again a firmware thing, but yeah, it is a very odd kind of phenomenon that goes on. So I love the footage. The autofocus, well, with vehicles at least, was pretty good. But the problem is I had another shoot day planned for this shoot, but it got canceled because the weather suddenly turned cold, and then the owner of the car said they're taking it in for the winter. And so I was hooped. I needed something else to shoot. I hadn't made up my mind yet. And so luckily, I was talking to my buddy Nico, who was just starting his new YouTube channel. And he said, hey, why don't you come along to my shoot? I'm shooting my first episode. I said, sweet. So that's gonna be part 2 of the video. We're gonna shoot some humans, not cars, and just tag along on Nico's shoots. So make sure you're subscribed so you'll get notified of the next part, which will be out in days, within the week. See you in the next one.
Makeshift camping.
This is the wrap party.